The spaceship hovered silently above the surface of Xylar, a planet unlike any Elias Kane had ever seen. Its sky shimmered in colors humans had no names for, swirling blues and purples that twisted in patterns that seemed almost alive. From above, the sprawling cities of the Xylarian Empire looked like giant crystals rising from the ground, their surfaces catching the light of twin suns. Elias felt a strange thrill as he watched it all, but he kept his expression calm. Emotions were never a weakness in diplomacy. They were a tool, and he needed to be in full control. He stepped down from the shuttle onto the landing platform, the air thick with a scent that was neither sweet nor sour, but foreign enough to make him pause. His boots made soft sounds against the smooth surface as he moved forward. Around him, Xylarians bustled in quiet efficiency, their limbs and movements so different from human norms that Elias had to resist the urge to study them too closely. They were tall, elegant, with translucent skin that glimmered faintly in the sunlight. Their eyes, large and multifaceted, seemed to see everything, and that made him uneasy. A single misstep here could cost him not only his life, but the fragile chance at human Xylarian peace. He was led into the heart of the palace, a structure that seemed to grow out of the ground itself. The walls shifted subtly in texture and color, responding to the presence of visitors. Some Xylarian officials greeted him with a nod, their voices melodic, almost musical, while others watched in silence. Elias noted everything but responded to nothing. Silence had become his shield. Finally, he entered a chamber larger than any human cathedral, a space filled with soft, glowing light and floating platforms that moved without visible support. At the center, standing with perfect posture, was Princess Lysra. She was more beautiful and more terrifying than he had imagined. Her presence seemed to command the room, bending light and attention toward her. Her eyes, luminous and shifting like liquid, fixed on him immediately. "Welcome, Commander Kane," she said, her voice calm but layered with curiosity. "I have heard much about humans. Your species fascinates me." She stepped closer, and every movement seemed deliberate, precise. "I would like to understand you. I will ask you questions, and you will answer me truthfully. Do you agree?" Elias looked at her steadily. He said nothing. The chamber seemed to grow heavier, almost as if her gaze had weight. The attendants around her shifted uncomfortably. Silence in Xylarian culture was rare, almost threatening. Yet Elias did not flinch. He understood that his silence was as much a statement as any words he could speak. "I will ask again," Lysra said, her tone slightly sharper now. "Are you willing to answer me?" Still, Elias remained quiet. His eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. He did not know if she had expected defiance, fear, or evasiveness. Whatever it was, he would not give it to her. In human terms, words could lie. Silence, however, could carry truth. Lysra's fingers moved slightly, tracing patterns in the air that Elias could not understand, a form of Xylarian thought expression. "Curious," she murmured, almost to herself. "You are unlike any human I have studied. Your silence, it is unnerving." Elias inclined his head slightly. He did not offer reassurance. In the subtle dance of diplomacy, he needed her to realize that humanity could not be measured by familiar terms. His silence was meant to unsettle, yes, but also to convey a deeper point. Humans acted, they observed. They understood in ways that did not always require words. Lysra paused, studying him as if attempting to read the truth hidden behind his still features. The attendants exchanged whispers, their curiosity and anxiety mixing in the air. The princess had never been confronted with someone like this. She was used to intelligence that could be parsed, emotions that could be read, thoughts that could be predicted. Elias Kane presented none of these in the ways she expected. Very well, she said finally, her tone measured again. If you will not answer, then perhaps your actions will speak. You will remain under my observation. Every decision you make, every step you take, will be a statement of your intentions. Elias simply nodded. His compliance did not imply submission, it implied understanding. He knew that actions would carry the weight of diplomacy here more than words ever could. The princess arranged for him to stay in quarters within the palace, where his every move would be observed discreetly. He was given access to the central library, a place filled with holographic records and archives of Xylarian history. He spent hours studying their culture, their technology, and their complex social structures. While others might have been intimidated by the depth and precision of their knowledge, Elias saw opportunity. Humans had a way of seeing patterns differently, connecting threads that others could not. Days passed. Lysera's questions continued, though she now phrased them indirectly. She sent messengers, advisors, and even strangers to engage him, hoping to provoke conversation or reveal something about human psychology. Each time, Elias responded with silence or with actions that communicated far more than words could. On one occasion, a small machine malfunctioned in the palace gardens, threatening to collapse a structure. Without waiting for instructions, Elias assessed the situation, calculating angles and leverage using only a few available tools. Within minutes, he had stabilized the structure, preventing disaster. Lysera had watched from a balcony, her eyes widening at the ease with which he solved the problem. You act without asking," she said afterward, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You do not wait for permission, yet you cause no harm. How can you be so certain?" Elias smiled faintly, a rare gesture. "Observation and experience," he said finally, though his tone carried weight, not arrogance. His voice, when used, had impact. Lysera studied him even more intensely after that day. Her fascination deepened, but so did her unease. Humans, she realized, were unpredictable in ways Xylarians were not accustomed to. Their intelligence was not only in knowledge, but in intuition, in moral reasoning, and in courage under pressure. And Elias Kane embodied all of it, without a single word. Word of his silence spread through the palace. Some advisors whispered that humans might be dangerous, that a species capable of such silent deliberation could hide intentions no one could anticipate. Others argued that humans might be exceptional allies, their unpredictability a potential asset. Lysera found herself unable to ignore the weight of his presence. Each moment he remained silent, each subtle decision he made, challenged her understanding of logic and intuition. She began to question her own assumptions, her own methods of judgment. Here was a being who defied the rules she had been taught since birth, and yet he acted with precision, purpose, and undeniable competence. One evening, she observed him in the central library, tracing patterns in the holographic archives, connecting events from centuries apart. He moved his hands slowly, deliberately, almost as if conducting an invisible symphony. She realized then that his silence was not ignorance. It was focus. He did not need to speak because he was listening, analyzing, and learning at a level that Xylarians rarely achieved. Lysera approached him cautiously. "Commander Kane," she said softly, "why do you not speak? You understand me, yet you choose to remain silent. Is it defiance or something else?" Elias turned to her, his gaze calm and unwavering. "Words can lie," he said simply. "Actions, when measured and true, do not." For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar: uncertainty. Xylarians prized honesty, but honesty usually came with expression, with explanation. Here was a creature who could be honest without revealing anything beyond what was necessary. The days turned into a week. Elias's silence continued to unsettle and intrigue her in equal measure. He participated in missions around the palace, observing the complexities of Xylarian life, assisting in small crises, and always responding through action rather than speech. Every success, every calculated move, revealed a new layer of human capability. Lysera began to see a pattern. Humans were not superior in technology or intellect alone. They had qualities Xylarians rarely measured: moral courage, improvisational skill, and the ability to act decisively without needing approval. Elias Kane, in his quiet, deliberate way, was demonstrating that humans were not merely another species, they were exceptional. That evening, she stood on her balcony, looking down at the alien gardens where Elias walked alone, observing the movements of the bioluminescent plants. She felt a strange mixture of admiration and fear. His silence was not emptiness, it was depth, a depth she had never encountered in her studies or in any visitor to her world. In that moment, she realized the truth. Humanity, in its unpredictability and quiet strength, was a force that even an advanced civilization like hers could not fully anticipate. And Elias Kane, through nothing more than stillness and observation, had already begun to change everything. Days passed, and Elias Kane's presence in the Xylarian palace became more than a curiosity. It was a quiet disturbance to the carefully measured life of the princess and her court. Princess Lysera had grown accustomed to observing him, but the more she watched, the more unsettled she felt. There was a method to his silence, a patience in the way he moved, studied, and acted. Humans, it seemed, did not need to speak to assert themselves. Every decision Elias made, no matter how small, carried a weight that even the most powerful Xylarians could not ignore. One morning, Lysera summoned him to accompany her on a tour of the floating gardens, a complex of bioluminescent plants and artificial waterfalls suspended above the palace grounds. "I want you to see how we maintain balance here," she said. Her voice was calm, but held the undercurrent of a challenge. "Tell me what you notice." Elias said nothing. He simply followed, his eyes scanning the environment, noting the patterns of growth, the subtle ways the water flowed, and the precision with which the plants were tended. He occasionally adjusted his pace to avoid stepping on fragile flowers, but otherwise he moved silently, observing. Lysera watched him closely. "You see everything," she said, "yet you say nothing. Do you not wish to share your thoughts?" He looked at her briefly and shook his head. His silence was deliberate, a choice that she now understood as a form of expression. Their tour continued in silence until they reached a section of the gardens that housed a delicate species of plant known as the Luminara. Its stems glowed faintly, and its flowers emitted soft pulses of light, responding to touch. One of the caretakers, distracted by another task, allowed a platform to tilt dangerously. In an instant, Elias moved, placing his hand under the shifting platform to stabilize it. He did not speak, but his action conveyed understanding and precision. The platform stopped before any damage occurred. Lysera's eyes widened. She had expected subtle interference, a delay, even failure. Instead, he had acted instantly, decisively, and without error. "You do not hesitate," she whispered. "Humans, you think differently." Elias nodded once, his expression neutral. After the gardens, Lysera arranged a demonstration of Xylarian technology, a simulation of interstellar diplomacy designed to test a visitor's understanding of politics, ethics, and negotiation. Several holographic avatars appeared, representing planets and factions across the galaxy. The simulation was complex, with shifting alliances, hidden motives, and urgent crises that required immediate decision-making. Lysera leaned against a railing, observing. "Let us see how you handle this," she said. Elias studied the simulation carefully. Unlike the Xylarian participants, he did not rush. He watched each faction, analyzing motivations and historical patterns. Then, step by step, he moved pieces, made decisions, and intervened. His choices were not based on emotion, nor on conventional logic. He anticipated responses, prepared contingencies, and guided the factions toward peaceful compromise without coercion. Lysera's breath caught as she watched him work. The simulation, designed to be almost unsolvable, ended with harmony among the factions. Every Xylarian strategist present had failed at this task before. Elias had succeeded in a fraction of the time, silently, without hesitation, and without explanation. You have no model for failure," she said quietly. "And yet, you succeed." Elias looked at her briefly and returned his attention to the simulation. "I learn from observation," he said finally. His voice was calm, factual, without pride. Later, she asked him to accompany a team of Xylarian scientists to a remote observation station near the planet's equator. The station monitored meteorological patterns that affected the planet's delicate ecosystems. When they arrived, a sudden electrical storm struck. Communication systems went down, and equipment risked being damaged. Panic rippled through the scientists, their voices rising in alarm. Elias immediately took control, directing personnel with precise gestures and simple instructions. He climbed the platform to secure sensitive instruments, adjusted circuits with careful hands, and coordinated efforts to protect the station. He did not shout, he did not hesitate, and yet everything was done faster and more efficiently than the Xylarians thought possible. Lysera observed from the control deck, amazed. She had expected at least minor disaster, but Elias had turned chaos into order without a word. She realized then that human action was different from Xylarian action. Humans did not rely on explanation or emotion to achieve results. They acted with clarity and intent, guided by reason and intuition in a way that Xylarians rarely allowed themselves to trust. After the storm passed, Lysera approached him. "How can you remain so calm?" she asked. "Do you not fear failure?" Elias met her gaze. "Failure is part of observation. It teaches what words cannot. I do not fear it. I study it, and I act accordingly." She paused, processing his words. It was not the content, but the meaning behind them. In Xylarian thought, fear was a guide, a signal to act carefully. In humans, she saw, fear was merely data, a challenge to overcome through intellect and decisiveness. The following days brought further tests. Lysera arranged for him to witness a simulation of interspecies conflict, where two Xylarian factions argued over territory. Human diplomats had a reputation for resolving disputes in unexpected ways, and Lysera wanted to see if Elias could manage this. Once again, he observed first. He did not intervene immediately. Instead, he listened, watched gestures, and noted the hidden dynamics of the factions. Then he stepped forward, offering solutions not in words but through actions, drawing diagrams, demonstrating trade-offs, showing how resources could be shared without loss or insult. Slowly, the factions began to cooperate, influenced more by the clarity of his demonstration than any speech he could have delivered. Lysera realized something profound. Elias was teaching without teaching, guiding without instructing. Humans had a way of demonstrating truth, a way of acting that communicated more than words ever could. His silence was not absence. It was method, strategy, and insight. One evening, after a long day of observation and testing, Lysera found herself alone with him in the palace gardens. The bioluminescent plants glowed faintly around them, and the twin suns had set, leaving the sky alive with stars. "You have changed my understanding," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I thought I knew intelligence, courage, and strategy, but humans, you are different." Elias looked at her, his expression calm. "We do not always measure intelligence the same way," he said simply. "We act, observe, and learn. Words are only one form of expression. Lysera studied him, trying to understand how one being could hold such depth without speaking more than a few sentences a day. It was unsettling, yet inspiring. She realized that humans, though seemingly fragile, had an inner strength that even Xylarians, proud, ancient, and advanced, had not encountered. The next day, she arranged for him to meet with a delegation of Xylarian scholars. They were curious about his methods, skeptical of his silence, and eager to understand the humans' ways. As usual, Elias spoke little. Instead, he guided them through practical demonstrations, showing them how humans approached problems, how they weighed morality against practicality, how they adapted to changing circumstances. The scholars were fascinated and frustrated at once. They had never encountered a species that could communicate so much without speaking. By the end of the day, they were exhausted, but enlightened. They whispered to one another that perhaps humans could teach Xylarians a new kind of wisdom. Lysera, observing from a balcony, felt a mix of admiration and anxiety. Elias Kane was proving that humans were not only capable, but extraordinary. His silence was not emptiness, it was depth. His actions revealed strategy, ethics, courage, and insight that Xylarians rarely attributed to outsiders. One afternoon, a minor crisis erupted. A shipment of critical resources had been misrouted to a dangerous sector of the planet, and a rogue weather pattern threatened it. Panic spread among the palace staff. Lysera expected confusion, perhaps mistakes, but Elias acted immediately. Without orders, he coordinated the recovery. He assessed the risks, directed personnel, and implemented solutions. By the time Lysera arrived, the situation was under control, resources secure, and no one harmed. "You do not need permission to act," she said, her voice a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "Humans, you think and move differently than anyone I know." Elias nodded. "Observation guides action. Silence preserves clarity." That night, Lysera could not sleep. She walked alone through the glowing gardens, reflecting on the week's events. Humans, she realized, were unpredictable, capable of courage and insight beyond Xylarian calculation. Elias Kane, through quiet observation and decisive action, was teaching her a new way to think about strength, intelligence, and morality. For the first time, she felt both fear and admiration. Humans were strange, silent, and unpredictable, but they were also remarkable. And Elias Kane, by doing nothing more than being himself, was changing the Xylarian understanding of what it meant to be powerful. She returned to her quarters, her mind alive with thought. She had always prided herself on knowing the mind of any creature she met. Now she realized that humans might never be fully understood. They operated on logic, emotion, and intuition in ways that were alien to Xylarians, yet terrifyingly effective. As the twin moons rose over the crystalline city, Lysera knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy, and through one silent human diplomat, her world was already beginning to change. A few weeks passed since Elias Kane had first arrived on Xylar, and the once orderly palace atmosphere had begun to shift. Whispers moved through the corridors like currents of wind, soft and persistent. Some Xylarians admired him, noting his uncanny ability to act decisively without speaking. Others feared him, unable to understand how a being could remain so silent and yet command influence simply through presence and action. But Princess Lysera found herself caught between fascination and unease. Every time she watched him, she felt the unsettling truth more clearly. Humans were unpredictable in ways that even centuries of Xylarian experience could not fully prepare for. The first sign that the coming crisis would test them both came unexpectedly. A message arrived from the border of the Xylarian Empire. An unauthorized faction had attacked a human research station. The station was isolated, located in a sector known for dangerous weather patterns and volatile terrain. The attackers had not anticipated that humans and Xylarians were working together, and their assault was swift, aggressive, and precise. Lysera's eyes narrowed as she read the reports. "They are testing us," she said to Elias, who stood beside her silently, observing. "They want to see how we respond." Elias tilted his head slightly. He said nothing, but his eyes scanned the holographic maps, analyzing the situation with a speed and accuracy that even Lysera could not fully comprehend. Where she saw chaos, he saw patterns. Where her advisors panicked, he calculated. "You will lead the response," she said finally. Her voice carried authority, but also a hint of fear. "I want to see how humans handle a crisis of this magnitude." Elias nodded. He did not speak. Speech, in moments like this, would slow decisions. Silence, combined with observation, allowed him to process far more information than words ever could. The journey to the research station was perilous. The shuttle flew low over jagged mountain ranges, where wind currents shifted unpredictably and lightning flashed across the darkened skies. Human technology was sturdy, and Elias knew it, but even the strongest machines required careful guidance. He monitored the instruments, adjusting their course subtly, making split-second calculations as the shuttle shivered under the assault of the storm. Lysera sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You are calm," she whispered. "How can you remain so collected when everything around us is falling apart?" Elias's gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "Calm is clarity," he said quietly. "Fear is data. Panic solves nothing." By the time they arrived at the station, the attackers had already caused damage. Buildings were overturned, energy barriers disabled, and personnel were trapped in several sectors. Xylarian security forces had mobilized, but the chaos made coordinated action nearly impossible. Elias stepped out first, surveying the scene. He moved with a measured purpose, gesturing for humans and Xylarians alike to follow his directions. He divided the rescue efforts into 3 priorities: securing the wounded, restoring critical systems, and neutralizing the attackers. His plan was simple in theory, but required flawless execution. Each step relied on understanding not only human capabilities, but Xylarian technology and the strengths and weaknesses of both. Lysera watched from the observation platform as he acted. His silence magnified his authority. No one questioned his decisions because his precision left no room for doubt. He climbed over debris to reach trapped personnel, signaling others to follow. His movements were fast but deliberate, showing both strength and care. The attackers, seeing his command over the situation, hesitated. They were confident that humans were weak, fragile, and easy to manipulate. Elias, however, anticipated their hesitation and used it to his advantage. He directed defensive formations without a single word, positioning humans and Xylarians in ways that maximized their strengths and minimized risk. Hours passed, but under his guidance, the situation stabilized. Injured personnel were evacuated safely, energy systems restored, and the attackers neutralized without unnecessary loss. Lysera approached him once the chaos had subsided, her face pale but composed. You did not speak, yet everyone followed. They trusted you instantly. How?" Elias wiped dirt from his hands, his expression calm. "Trust is built through action. Decisions must be clear and effective. Words are secondary." Lysera realized then that his silence was a strategy, not a limitation. Humans did not need constant reassurance. They acted according to principle, observation, and instinct. It was both frightening and inspiring. In the following days, Lysera arranged for Elias to meet the Xylarian Council, a body of elders who governed with centuries of accumulated wisdom. They were skeptical of humans, and some openly challenged his methods. "Commander Kane," one elder said, his voice formal, "you move among us as if you understand everything, yet you speak so little. How can we trust your judgment?" Elias remained silent at first, allowing the question to hang in the air. Then, without words, he moved to a display, pointing out flaws in the Council's assumptions and demonstrating alternative approaches to the Empire's trade agreements. Each solution was precise, logical, and ethically sound. The Council watched, impressed and uneasy. Here was a being who needed no explanation, whose competence spoke louder than any argument. Lysera observed quietly from her seat. She understood the Council better than they realized. They valued words, precedent, and tradition. Elias's methods were foreign, yet undeniable. His silence had become a weapon of influence. Later that evening, she found him alone in the palace courtyard. The air was cool and the sky darkened, with stars glimmering faintly over the crystalline city. "Commander Kane," she said softly, "do you ever tire of remaining silent? Does it not frustrate you to withhold speech?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the faint light of the stars. "Speech is not required," he said simply. "It is action that matters. Words can mislead, delay, or complicate. In this way, I communicate clearly." Lysera shook her head, a mix of admiration and disbelief on her face. "Humans, you are unlike anything I have studied. You act with clarity that I cannot fully comprehend. It terrifies me." Elias inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words. His silence, she realized, was more than a method. It was a reflection of a mind that measured every detail, calculated every possibility, and chose action over distraction. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A message arrived that a critical human Xylarian research project, located on a nearby asteroid field, had been sabotaged. If the sabotage succeeded, vital resources for both humans and Xylarians would be lost. Lysera organized a team to investigate, and Elias joined them. Navigating the asteroid field was perilous. Rocks shifted unpredictably, and strong gravitational currents threatened to tear the ship apart. Human technology was resilient, but the risks were immense. Elias studied the patterns carefully, guiding the team through the maze of floating debris. He directed movements with gestures and minimal commands, every action precise, calculated, and effective. When they arrived at the research station, the sabotage was worse than anticipated. Vital systems had been disabled, and the attackers had left traps that could easily harm both humans and Xylarians. Elias stepped forward without hesitation. He examined the devices, quickly identifying the threats and dismantling them. He moved with both skill and caution, ensuring that every step was safe and every action efficient. Lysera watched him from the observation deck. She had seen him act before, but this time the stakes were higher, and the pressure was immense. Yet Elias remained calm, measured, and decisive. His silence was no longer unsettling, it was commanding. Every action inspired trust, every decision displayed competence beyond the expectations of even the most advanced civilization. By the time the crisis was resolved, the research station was safe. The sabotage neutralized, and both human and Xylarian personnel were unharmed. Lysera approached him again, her voice low and filled with awe. You move among danger with a calm that I cannot explain. It terrifies me, yet I feel inspired." Elias met her gaze, his expression unchanged. "Action and observation guide us," he said. "Fear is a tool, not a master." Lysera understood then that human strength was not in numbers, technology, or tradition. It was in resilience, courage, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Elias Kane, through silence and method, had revealed this truth to her and to the Xylarians. That night, As the twin moons rose over the crystalline city, Lysera reflected on everything she had witnessed. Humans were different, unpredictable, and yet extraordinarily capable. Their silence could terrify, but it could also teach. Elias Kane had shown that action could speak louder than words, that intelligence was more than knowledge, and that courage could exist without declaration. For the first time, she realized that humanity's presence in the galaxy was not just a new factor in politics or trade, it was a force that could redefine understanding itself. And through one silent human diplomat, her world had already begun to change in ways she had never imagined. The days following the asteroid field crisis were tense, but filled with cautious hope. The Xylarian court had begun to see humans not as unpredictable outsiders, but as capable partners with unique qualities that even the advanced civilization had not fully understood. Princess Lysera, who had once questioned Elias Kane's silence with suspicion, now observed him with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and awe. The next challenge came when a diplomatic summit was arranged between humans, Xylarians, and several other alien species in the sector. Lysera was to lead her people, while Elias would act as her advisor. The summit was critical. It would establish trade routes, technology exchanges, and mutual defense agreements that could affect the stability of the entire region. From the start, the summit was fraught with tension. Representatives from the other species were wary of humans, unsettled by the unknown. Some tried to provoke disagreements, testing whether humans could be manipulated or deceived. Others dismissed human intelligence entirely, expecting them to be compliant and predictable. Elias did not speak at first. He observed the delegates carefully, noting subtle cues, the way their limbs shifted, the timing of their gestures, the tone of their melodic voices. He analyzed patterns in their behavior, anticipating moves, identifying motives, and preparing strategies that did not rely on words. Lysera watched him closely. She had come to trust his judgment implicitly. "Commander Kane," she whispered, "they expect conflict, but you see solutions they cannot imagine. How do you do it?" Elias glanced at her briefly. "Observation guides action. Understanding is more than words. Decisions must be based on clarity, not persuasion." The summit began formally, with speeches, protocols, and displays of cultural power. Delegates spoke at length, but Elias remained silent, watching, listening, calculating. Then, small crises emerged: a trade dispute over mineral rights, a territorial disagreement, and a misunderstanding regarding technology sharing. Each could have escalated into conflict. Without waiting for permission, Elias moved. He approached the disputed holographic displays, repositioned the elements to illustrate compromise, and used gestures to demonstrate equitable solutions. Delegates paused, observing, then began to follow the method he had shown. Slowly, tensions eased. Conflicts that could have lasted weeks were resolved in hours. Lysera realized that his silence was no longer passive. It was active, commanding, and persuasive in ways the Xylarians had never seen. Words had limits. Actions, when clear and decisive, could transcend species, cultures, and expectations. As the summit progressed, Elias's strategies proved invaluable. He anticipated hidden motives, proposed solutions that satisfied multiple parties, and acted without hesitation. Each success reinforced a truth that Lysera had begun to see. Human qualities were extraordinary. They combined moral reasoning, strategic thinking, and the courage to act decisively, all without relying on constant verbal affirmation. By the final day of the summit, an unprecedented treaty was signed. Trade routes were opened, scientific collaboration was agreed upon, and mutual defense pacts were established. Humans had gained respect not through words, speeches, or displays of power, but through action, integrity, and insight. The other species left with a new understanding. Humans were unpredictable, Yes, but profoundly capable. After the summit, Lysera invited Elias to a private chamber in the palace. She looked at him with intensity, her eyes reflecting both admiration and a lingering unease. "You have changed everything," she said softly. "Not just for the Xylarians, but for every species here. Your silence, it terrifies and inspires. How can one being carry so much influence without speaking?" Elias regarded her calmly. "Words are only one form of influence. Action, clarity, and integrity carry more weight than speech. Humans rely on principles, not persuasion. That is how we lead, how we survive, and how we grow." Lysera nodded slowly, her mind processing the truth. She had once assumed that understanding required constant communication, that intelligence demanded explanation. Elias Kane had proven that action could teach more, inspire more, and even guide more effectively than words. In the following weeks, humans and Xylarians began collaborative projects that had previously seemed impossible. Humans introduced new problem-solving approaches, combining observation, logic, and moral reasoning in ways that Xylarians had rarely attempted. They redesigned energy systems, optimized trade logistics, and implemented conflict resolution methods that minimized casualties and preserved harmony. Lysera watched these developments with pride and wonder. The humans were proving that their presence was not only beneficial, but transformative. Through Elias Kane, she had learned that courage, decisiveness, and moral clarity were human strengths that even the most advanced civilizations could not replicate fully. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the crystalline city, Lysera walked with Elias through the palace gardens. The bioluminescent plants glowed faintly, casting soft light on the paths below. "Commander Kane," she said, "do you ever tire of being observed, tested, and followed wherever you go?" Elias's expression remained calm. "Observation is part of understanding. Testing is part of growth. Humans endure, adapt, and act when necessary. That is our nature." She stopped, considering his words. "You are extraordinary," she said. "Not just for your intelligence, but for your courage, patience, and the clarity of your actions. I have studied countless beings, yet none have moved me the way you have." Elias tilted his head slightly, acknowledging her admiration without pride. "Humans act as needed. Our strength is not in self-promotion, but in principles. We do what must be done." Lysera smiled, a mixture of respect and warmth. "Perhaps that is why your silence terrifies me. It carries certainty, control, and understanding that words cannot convey. You are not just a human diplomat. You are a lesson for all of us." In the weeks that followed, the Xylarian Empire began to adopt some human methods. Decision-making processes were adjusted to value action alongside discussion. Crisis management incorporated observation, patience, and decisive intervention. Even the Council, once skeptical, acknowledged that humans offered insights beyond their traditional measures of intelligence and diplomacy. Elias Kane, through nothing more than his presence, actions, and silent determination, had changed the course of Xylarian society. He had proven that humans were not just participants in the galaxy, they were capable of shaping it. Lysera found herself reflecting often on what she had learned. Humans were not superior because of technology or longevity. They were remarkable because of their courage, moral reasoning, and ability to act decisively under pressure. They could inspire trust, guide action, and redefine understanding without relying on speech. And Elias Kane, the silent human who had arrived with no fanfare, had become a symbol of these qualities. On the day of his departure, a ceremonial banquet was held in his honor. Xylarians and humans gathered together, celebrating the alliances, treaties, and friendships that had been forged. Delegates from other species toasted him, acknowledging the human contribution to stability and collaboration across the sector. Lysera stood beside him, her eyes reflecting pride and a quiet respect. "Commander Kane," she said softly, "you have taught us that action can be more powerful than words, that courage can transcend fear, and that principles can guide even the most complex societies. We will not forget this lesson." Elias inclined his head, his expression calm and resolute. "Humans act as needed," he repeated. "Observation, courage, and clarity are our tools. Principles guide us, and action defines us." As the banquet concluded and humans prepared to depart, Lysera felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and hope. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy not through conquest or dominance, but through understanding, courage, and decisiveness. And through one silent diplomat, the Xylarian Empire had glimpsed what it meant to act with true clarity, integrity, and courage. The human shuttle lifted into the sky, carrying Elias Kane away from Xylar, but his impact remained. Humans had proven that silence could teach, action could guide, and principles could inspire. And Lysera, watching him disappear among the stars, knew that humanity's presence in the galaxy would forever change the way civilizations understood strength, intelligence, and courage. For the first time, she understood that humans were not just another species. They were a force to be reckoned with, a presence that inspired both respect and awe. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the lessons of Elias Kane, the silent human who had terrified and inspired her, would shape the Xylarian Empire for generations to come. The twin moons reflected off the crystalline towers of the palace, and in the glow of the night, Lysera felt the quiet certainty that humanity's journey among the stars was only beginning.